And welcome everybody to the Postgame Show, the final yard here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I am your host, Louis Sung. I am joined by Coach Eric Smith. Coach, I'll be honest with you. I really thought I was going to have to do this show solo because any Dolphins fan worth their salt at this point probably wouldn't want anything to do with a show like this right now unless they were calling for everybody in the whole world to be fired and for Hard Rock Stadium to literally be blown off the face of the planet. So we'll go ahead and we'll try to smooth things over. We already have comments coming in even before the show started saying to fire Greer, get the rebuild started. It's a bad football team. Everything is horrible, etc., etc. We'll break down everything that happened in that game. And believe me, there was a lot of stuff that we can talk about that was bad, but there was also some stuff that I feel like, because there was also one comment from our good friend Parrish Stevens who said that Tua is not changing anything for the better. I don't agree with that. And I'm going to go ahead and explain why the season is, in spite of everything, the season is not over yet. But before we do all that, I just want to go ahead and mention that, as always, this show is brought to you by our good friends over at PrizePicks.com. PrizePicks.com is the revolutionary fantasy platform where you can pick up to 6 different players across professional sports leagues, whether that's the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, one of each. It's up to you to decide. Just choose whether your chosen player will get more or less than their projected stats. They give you free squares. They give you special Taco Tuesday promos, Flex Friday specials. You can get your money back if you lose or multiply the amount of money you can normally win. There's really no downside to doing it. All you have to do is just use the promo code 5 when you sign up. That's FIVE. And then they will give you $50 of promotional funds when you put in a $5 bet. So again, that's promo code 5, FIVE. Make sure you check that out and get started winning today. Also, we also have our other sponsor for the Final Yard post-game show. They are specifically setting up for post-game. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the Real Estate Shoppe.
The Final Yard is sponsored for the entire 2024 Dolphins season by the Real Estate Shoppe. Before you make a final decision about who should be your real estate broker, make sure you reach out to Amanda Martin and Javier Iglesias, the dynamic duo leading the Real Estate Shoppe, which combines market expertise with a passion for community and personalized service. They offer honest and professional real estate services, guiding buyers and sellers with integrity and a client-first approach. From pricing to negotiation, they ensure every step is smart and transparent. They operate in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. They understand the local markets like no one else. Their deep knowledge of these areas helps clients navigate the complicated nuances of home ownership in South Florida. So reach out to them. Again, it's the Real Estate Shoppe. You can find them on Instagram at the Fort Lauderdale Realtor, or give them a call at 954-268-9812. That's 954-268-9812. Before you make a final decision about real estate, reach out to the Real Estate Shoppe.
All right, so let's get into exactly what we just saw out there, Coach. Let's be real about something. This is a situation where the Miami Dolphins had the key to victory. All they had to do was just not make stupid mistakes. And let's be real about something. When I said that the Dolphins just had to run the football and they would probably win this game, that prediction was pretty darn close to correct. I'm looking at the team stats right now. The Dolphins ran for 188 yards on these Indianapolis Colts. So as I predicted, in spite of EPA or whatever stat you want to throw out there, these Colts give up a lot of yards on the ground. They just give up a lot of yards on the ground. And Miami could have scored based on that. But they made a lot of foolish mistakes, a lot of foolish decisions at bad times. I will not understand the decision not only to go 1st and 10 and you go fullback dive. That's the number one. That's the worst call you could have made in that decision, in that situation. Because why would you do that? Why are you trying to sneak around when you already know that the team can't stop what you're already doing on a normal basis? That's a Mike McDaniel issue. Again, that's something that he needs to fix if he intends to continue to be a head coach in this league. The other thing is on the player side of things, Alec Ingold and Raheem Mostert, both with just back-breaking fumbles at the worst possible time. In Mostert's case, part of me feels like his knee might have been down, and it looked like he mouthed that he was down before the fumble happened. When he was on the sideline, it looked like he cut away to him, and he was saying that he was already down. Whatever have you. This is a situation where if there's anything that you're going to look at, because nobody wants to hear positivity right now. Everybody in the comments right now is absolutely furious with the team, and they have every right to be. Chop Robinson should have never been a first-round pick. No play strength at all. Mike in West Palm Beach, joke of a franchise. It's a joke. The telegraphing fullback dies. Why was Tyreek Hill wearing a visor on that missed throw by Huntley? You're in a dome. A lot of things to nitpick about, a lot of things to be upset about, but this one just now, Black City White Lights. We should change the name to the Miami illegal shifts. Let's be okay. I understand. I get it. And believe me, I share the sentiment of frustration, of anger, of just overall disappointment with these Miami Dolphins, because we were expecting possibly the best season that we've ever had. And instead what we're getting is somewhere akin to what we were getting during the 1-15 season back when Cam Cameron was the head coach. Like right now, it feels that bad. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to try to put things in a little bit of perspective here. Even our good friend Eric Wiedeke, who is not going to be available for this show because he is currently indisposed with some other things going on in his life right now. I hope everything you have yourself take care of what you got to do, man. We'll be see you on Tuesday for Pulse. With that said, like I said, I am not going to say that the playoffs are off the table yet. I'm just not. And the reason I say that is because it's still relatively early in the season. There's still plenty of time to get this thing turned around. And the one aspect that has been missing this entire time, even when the Dolphins were still kind of not at firing on all cylinders, the one thing that's been missing, and this is what happens to any team that usually doesn't get to play with their starting quarterback, Tua is projected to return against the Arizona Cardinals. And if there is one thing that you can say about this Dolphins offense is that it needs Tua in order to function at even a remotely high level. The only thing that the Dolphins had going for them was the run game. And this is why I feel like the season is not over yet. Because if you can lean on the run game the way that Miami did today, again, they ran for 188 yards. That's a lot of yards. It was some crucial mistakes in key moments that ended up losing Miami this game. They should have won this game. They easily could have kicked the field goal and tied it instead of letting the Colts end up getting the ball back the way that they did. And that would have stopped all the momentum shifting from happening. They could have easily done that. But because Alec Ingold fumbled at the red zone, everything just went to pot. So now you have Tua coming back against the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals are talented. Kyler Murray is another dangerous running type quarterback. He's got Marvin Harrison Jr., who is going to be, I'm sure that he's going to have himself a phenomenal career. I personally feel like if they can run the ball the way that they have been these past couple of games, and then you add Tua to that equation, I'm not saying that now that Tua's back, you start throwing the football all over the place again. That's not the plan. If you want to win in the NFL, now, it's like the game's always evolving, Coach. There seems to be a very strong emphasis all of a sudden on running the ball, a lot more than there has been in the past decade plus. Because we're not seeing quarterbacks regularly put up 200, 300 yards per game anymore. They're just not. Like even Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback we've seen since Dan Marino himself, as far as throwing ability to make things happen out of nothing, just overall, just phenomenal talent. Even Mahomes, he's not putting up 300, 400 yards a game. He's putting up very meager numbers, 200 yards, 230 yards. And that's Mahomes. Quarterbacks today, this year in the NFL, the run game has taken up a huge emphasis, and Miami knows how to do it. They have done it. They just need to not make stupid mistakes. So if you add Tua to that equation and make it so that now the threat of throwing the football actually exists, the offense could probably get its feet back under it. Now, the question is, will they? I don't know. But I'm saying that there's hope. I'm saying that there's a chance. And I don't want to go ahead and just throw away the entire season and I'm trying my best and not let my emotions take over and say that it's time to throw it all away. There's already people talking about tanking for Cam Ward. I'm not going to do that, man. Let's see what happens when Tua comes back. If Tua goes down with another injury of some kind, then yes, the season is over. Wrap it up. It's done. But if he comes back and the offense starts to look like its old self again, then anything is possible. Anything is possible. This whole offense is predicated on Tua being the point guard of how this all works. Without it, it doesn't matter who you throw in there. They tried Skylar Thompson. It didn't work. They tried Tyler Huntley. It didn't work. They tried Tim Boyle. And very briefly, it seemed like it was working for a second. It just didn't work enough with 2 minutes left on the line. Tim Boyle always gets thrown in this position where it's like he has to make some magic happen in the last possible moment because the guy he was playing for ended up getting thrown out the game with an injury. Like Tim Boyle's the only one who looks like he can throw the football for this team right now, besides Tua himself. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, in spite of all the comments lighting me up on fire right now, because how dare I have anything positive to say right now? And then Paris saying, believe your eyes, the offense wasn't clicking when he was in there. I agree with you. It wasn't working great. But we could move the football, man. And we weren't running the ball as much as we were supposed to be. Now they are. The offense functions right now on running the football. Add Tua as the quarterback to this run-oriented offense, and you might have a shot. That's all I'm going to say on the offensive side of things. We'll get to the defense in a few minutes. But, Coach, I want to go ahead and let you have your say in this. Your overall thoughts on what's going on with this team. What's the biggest issue right now? And is there any hope for the season, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I thought that going into this game, and I said as much on shows I was on before the game, that it was going to come down to a close game where the defense that made more plays, more game-changing plays, was going to be the team that won the game. And when you look at the game-changing plays that occurred, it started out looking good for Miami with Sealer recovering the fumble on that botched snap, but then you had Mostert fumbling and you had Ingold fumbling, so you kind of had a 2-1 advantage for the Colts in that department. So you had to do something else to overcome that, and that just never happened. The more that we watch this team, especially without Tua, it seems like Mike McDaniel is a good play designer. He is not a good play caller. Like, this is, the same stuff over and over again, and we went through it when Tua was in the lineup, having issues with the way that McDaniel was calling the game. And when Tua is in the lineup, Tua is good enough to overcome a lot of that and cover that up. But we can see, Mike McDaniel just outthinks himself. Like, the 3rd and 1, the 3rd and 1 fullback dive to Ingold. Like, you had Jalen right in there. He was cooking. All you had to do was to keep running the ball inside, the duos, the inside zones, that kind of stuff. And part of that is that those plays give the running backs options, right? It's not, hey, you have to run directly to this hole like a fullback dive is. A fullback dive is, look, you are running to the B gap, and that is the only way that succeeds, and it didn't work. It also felt like after Jalen Wright started to get things going on the inside, then we started to go to the outside, right? Whether it was Achane going to the outside, they tried to take Wright to the outside. It just seems like every time that, we do well running the ball inside, that he just doesn't want to commit to it. And that's what we saw again. So I don't know, like, I don't feel like the season's over, but I certainly don't feel like this is a team that's capable of a deep run in the playoffs even after Tua returns. And, a lot of that is that I don't think that McDaniel is going to change as a play caller. We're gonna win the games against the bad teams like we have. When we get into tight games against good teams, unless Tua can overcome the play calling, then we're going to keep having the same results. So I don't know. I don't see McDaniel giving up play calling. So I don't know. Like I said, I think we could still be a playoff team, but even if Tua comes back and we get back to 500 quickly, am I optimistic that this is going to be a deep playoff run team like a lot of us had hoped coming into the season? Not really. And that's going to stay that way until McDaniel shows the ability in close games to, not try to outsmart himself. That's just the way that it feels every week with McDaniel.
So now here's where I'll go ahead and I'll change the question here. There's a lot of comments coming in. Thomas Tedder right now is particularly frustrated. They all laughed on the sideline like the game is a joke. Basically, he's saying that the players have no discipline. They don't really care what's going on out there. Let me go ahead and I'll go ahead and I'll bring this up too. Paris Stevens says trade Kohu too. He can't play. I mean, listen, Kader Kohu, as far as I can tell, maybe I saw something, maybe I missed something, but I thought he played well today. Like he deflected a pass. He was good in coverage. It's not like Anthony Richardson was lighting it up on us. The only way he beat us was with his legs, which is exactly the way that if he was going to do it, that was the way he was going to do it. What was his? I'm pulling up his chart right now. As far as the Anthony Richardson went 10 of 24 for 129 yards. That's pitiful. That's horrible. And we're blaming Kader Kohu. There's nothing. It's nothing about that. There's nothing about that. As far as I'm concerned with the defense, once again, give credit to Anthony Weaver and the players on this team because they were phenomenal for what they were asked to do, constantly going back on the field over and over and over again because the offense can't do anything to keep a drive going. You have Calais Campbell in his 17th year in the league, and he's still playing like a young guy. Honestly, if he still wants to play, I'd bring him back next year. Just because, like, heck, yeah, absolutely. Let's bring him back. And so I want to be able to go ahead and give credit to Anthony Weaver for the amazing job that he's done as far as being the defensive coordinator. He has turned this defense into something formidable. Are running quarterbacks still going to be a problem? Yes. You know why? Because every defense has problems with running quarterbacks. The whole point of what makes them special is that they can run. You don't expect that. You can't predict that. If you let a guy just take off and run, then more than likely he's going to get a few yards every time. Because unless you're actively watching for that, and if you do that, that means that you're going to leave the field open for somebody else. That's just the reality of football. If your quarterback can run, you have to account for it, and it makes things easier. What the Colts were doing with Anthony Richardson, they were projecting it the whole way. The defense knew what was going to happen, but after a certain point, and we're talking about Chop Robinson, we're talking about Kader Kohu, these guys are exhausted. They're fried, man. Like, it happens. And even then, it's not like they were giving up play after play, just giving up and saying, we can't handle it anymore. They gave up. They couldn't handle it anymore. And even then, they didn't give up a touchdown at the end. They had a goal line stand. They stopped them to a field goal. They gave every opportunity for the offense to play well. And for all the talk about Chop Robinson not playing well, yes, he missed a tackle. And then he came back and had to get the tackle as a positive gain instead of a tackle for a loss. Keep in mind, folks, Chop Robinson is a pass rusher. That's what he was supposed to be. He wasn't supposed to get this much playing time. He was supposed to be able to learn, develop, become somebody who is better than this. And setting the edge was never his strong suit. It was never the thing that he was like, oh, this is the thing he's here to do. He was here to be a pass rusher. He was there to be potentially the new Cameron Wake. Even Cam Wake in his prime years was not this world-renowned edge setter. Okay. So what he did was he was a pass rusher. He got sacks like nobody's business. And that was what made him special. Paris Stevens asking why take him as a first rounder? Because of how good he could be as a pass rusher. That was what he was there. He has a get off like nobody else's business. He's special in that regard. But if you're coming in here and you're expecting him to play lights out, knowing that he has all the athletic ability in the world, you knew this going in. You knew this when they selected him. Chop Robinson was a supremely athletic and talented player, but he is not fully developed. There's still so much more for him to learn, and expecting him to become the next Jason Taylor. Even Jason Taylor wasn't Jason Taylor when Jason Taylor came into in the NFL. He had some work to do. And so to pick on certain players on the defense, I feel like the defense has nothing to do with anything that went wrong today. Absolutely zero things that went wrong in this game as far as the defense is concerned. I can't think of anything except for a couple of plays. That's it.
The only thing I would say to that, I don't think they did anything wrong necessarily, but we're still lacking game-changing plays. Yeah, we had the Sealer play that one time, but how many other times did we have Anthony Richardson dead to rights and couldn't bring him down? We got close on the Ramsey one that he almost forced the fumble. Poyer had maybe not an interception, but that the throw to Pittman went off of his fingers. Like, it feels like we're close to some of those game-changing plays, but there hasn't been a lot of those, from this defense. And that, so not to say that they're doing anything wrong. We definitely didn't lose the game because of this defense, but there is still room for improvement there in terms of being able to close on some of those game-changing plays, create turnovers, that type of stuff.
And there are people saying now that if Tua's so healthy, why didn't he play today? To the quick and easy answer, legally speaking, in the NFL rules, he was not eligible to play today. He has to be able to practice first in order to come off the concussion protocol. He's not eligible to come off of IR yet. That's why he can't play yet. It has nothing to do with whether he wants to. Tua wanted to come back before the IR even started. Okay. Tua was already in the room chatting it up with his teammates the same day that he got his concussion. He probably wanted to play. That's next week. But because the IR dictates you have to be out at least 4 games, that's why he probably would have come back 2 weeks ago if he could. He can't. He probably would have. He wants to play. Tua wants to play. He will play, by the way. And I fully expect him to play against the Arizona Cardinals. Yeah. And he is the only hope that this offense has left, because, as you said, Coach, it doesn't seem like McDaniel's going to change anything as far as his mentality with play calling. And honestly, if he's going to be that way, I would prefer he doesn't change anything now, because just, again, add Tua to this run-oriented offense, and you might have something there. Like, let Tua get 178 yards passing per game, but make the passes actually work. That's the only difference. So a lot of quarterbacks out there, again, we've already discussed this, their average passing yards per game nowadays is 200, 230 yards a game. In the past 10 years, we've regularly been seeing quarterbacks going upwards of 280, 300, sometimes 400 yards a game. Coach, that's not the way the NFL is playing anymore. We've regressed in a way. I honestly don't mind it so much. I like being able to run the football. But the truth of the matter is that passing, we talk about the NFL being a passing-oriented league. Not anymore. Not anymore.
I wouldn't call it regress. I think it's just the evolution. I mean, just like everything else, like the old stuff always comes back in style, and that's what we're seeing now. You had the stuff earlier with, the 2 high safeties is ruining the pass game, whatever. So it's just an evolution, right? It might be, limiting the pass game, but the good teams are going to evolve with that, and they're going to take what the defense is giving them. So when defenses are going to lighter linebackers, more nickel and dime defenses, more 2 high safeties, then the good teams are going to start running the ball, because the good teams don't care about those numbers, right? In all of those Tom Brady years, like, he wasn't, chasing stats. He was taking easy completions that just happened to rack up to, massive passing numbers. But that's because that was what was there. And that's what we're seeing in the NFL now, especially as there's more of the Shanahan type offenses, spreading around the NFL that puts a priority on running the ball. We're going to see that evolution back to the running game. And that's what I think we're seeing now. I do hope that they continue to make that a priority when Tua returns. But I think that also, I think that between Waddle and Hill, they only had 1 catch today, if I remember correctly, just Waddle, or maybe 2. I don't know. They definitely were not a big part of the offense. And that's a problem with, building around those type of receivers, those smaller, speedy receivers, is that when Tua is in the lineup, that's fine, because that's what he excels at. But the skill set that Tua excels at is not, what everybody else can do. And then you get, you can't just throw the ball up to those guys. That's why you're seeing Janu Smith become a bigger part of the offense. Like, there was that one throw, I think it was, I think one of Boyle's early completions was a high pass to Janu Smith over the middle. And that was a overthrown ball, but that was Janu Smith, climbing the ladder, going up to make that catch. But really, outside of Smith, there's nobody else on the roster that can do that. And that is a limiting factor when you start moving to a backup quarterback, where the Dolphins are multiple layers into that backup quarterback room. So I hope that they do continue to run the ball when Tua comes back, but I do expect, the passing numbers to jump back up quite a bit as well.
And I'm perfectly fine with that. And for folks who are saying that we're saying that, Tua was on fire the first 2 games, and we never said that.
It's the beginning of the season. Like almost every team, like when you look at the NFL today, those first couple weeks are essentially an extended preseason, right? And I have pretty high confidence that after we've gotten through those first couple of games, that the offense would have found its groove. But of course, Tua got hurt and we never got to see that. But I still don't have any concerns with that offense when Tua returns.
So now here's where we can talk about some things that actually need to be fixed. And this comes right down to Mike McDaniel. And I don't even want to get into the GM stuff. I know that people are talking about, listen, Chris Grier needs to be fired. Chris Grier needs to be fired, blah, 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 blah. Listen, enough. I get it. I understand everybody wants Chris Grier's head on a pike, but this is one of those things where the GM's not going to make a difference during the season. This is one of those things now where we can look at the head coach and we can say he needs to fix this. He needs to adapt to what he's doing. He's already adapted in one way. He started running the football more, and the offense saw improvement because of it. We were actually able to move the football at this point. Now, once again, I bring this up. Mike McDaniel is somebody who, as a reminder, he led the team to a top 5 offense the first 2 years he's been in charge. Whether you put that on Tyreek, obviously it's not just Tyreek, because if it was only Tyreek, we would still have an offense. It's not just Tyreek. He is somebody who is learning how to be a head coach. We already know this. We literally just gave him an extension because he had led the team to 2 straight playoff appearances. And then I will admit that I have had these issues myself with knee-jerk reactions. I understand that. I get it. This is one of those things, though, that to immediately call for McDaniel's head the moment things don't go the way that you always want it to, I just feel like it's very short-sighted. It's emotional. It's reactional. It's not something that needs to happen this way. We have had horrible years as Miami Dolphins fans. We have watched some horrible football teams. If we fired the head coach every time we had one, then there would be a point where we would not have a coach for more than 1 year at a time. It would be a new coach every single year. It would be a new GM every single year. Like, you can't do that. No franchise runs that way. No franchise runs that way. And even teams that have some of the greatest in the business, you look at Mike Tomlin with the Pittsburgh Steelers. It feels like he's been there since I was a child. You have guys like John Harbaugh. He's been there since I was a kid. The Ravens have had bad years. The Steelers have had bad years. They're still rolling with Tomlin and Harbaugh because they know what they have in them. They are good coaches. They've also had the opportunity to learn what it takes to be a good coach. It may not necessarily happen overnight, especially with younger guys like a McDaniel, who is still trying to understand, okay, what do I have to do to be a head coach? That's not what anybody wants to hear right now, because this is a world of instant results. If you want to fire Chris Grier and try to keep Mike McDaniel, I personally don't think it's going to work, because the new GM is going to want to be able to hire a new coach. Anytime you change the front office, it starts over from scratch. You have to. It has to start over all over again. So if you fire Grier, that means you're basically asking for another 4-year rebuild. Do we really want to go through that again? Do we really want to go through that after 1 year of things not working out the way that we want it to? It hasn't even been a full season yet. We've had disappointing ends to the past couple of seasons, yes. But doggone it, those are some of the highest highs we've ever had as Dolphins fans. Those are some of the most incredible seasons. We had so much hype. We had so much excitement. And the reason we had so much excitement was for the very factors that we are now lamenting in this very moment. You have to take the bad with the good. So I'm going to go ahead and Eric, Eric, are you there? Are you there? It's just like another account. When the fixtures are relatively apparent to everyone involved and it's ignored by the head coach, at what point do you look at him differently? We already are looking at him differently. We're looking at him as saying, dude, you need to, for lack of a better term, you need to get your head out of your tail and start looking at things from an objective perspective. You need to be able to understand that what you're doing right now is not working. And Robert Gonzalez, Greer has been GM for almost 20 years. That's not correct. Greer has not been the GM for 20 years. He hasn't even been the GM for 5 years. Before that, it was Mike Tannenbaum. And so you can't pin like, oh, well, maybe he's been 5 years. I have to check and see when Greer officially got promoted, but it definitely has not been 20 years. He's been in the franchise for 20 years as a scout and has worked his way up the ladder, but he has not been the GM for 20 years. So McDaniel has to learn what it means to be a head coach. That's what he hasn't learned yet. Right now, he's a very good offensive coordinator. But being an offensive coordinator is not what it means to be a head coach. That's not the same thing.
I don't even know if I agree that he is a good offensive coordinator. Like I said, I think he's a good play designer. Like, we're probably going to go back and look at this film and we're going to say there's receivers running open and all of that stuff. But he has not shown an ability outside of when Tua's in the lineup to be able to call a game that fits the personnel that's there. And that's the frustration, I think, for me and a lot of fans, is that, when you look at the allure of having Mike McDaniel as your head coach, it was that he's supposed to be this offensive genius. So if the suggestions to take away the play calling from him and let him focus on being more of a head coach, like, that's not his strong point. Like, nobody views him as a disciplinarian or something like that. So if you take play calling, then what do you have left other than a quirky little guy that is not your typical head coach type person like John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin? Those are head coach only type coaches, and they let their guys under them do their thing. That was not the vision that Mike McDaniel was hired under. It was to be a head coach and run the offense. So if you start taking those play calling duties away from him, then I don't really see the point in keeping him around. And that's been the frustration, is just the lack of growth in that regard. Like, we were tolerant of it for the first couple of years, saying, he is learning, right? He's never been an offensive coordinator before, never been a head coach before. And, so we tolerated that somewhat in terms of letting him learn. But now we're into year 3 and we're seeing the same pre-snap penalties, the same wasted timeouts, these same, puzzling play calls. And it just doesn't feel like we're getting that growth that we should be at this point.
I can agree with that. One person said that I couldn't name 5 picks that GM Chris Greer has actually hit on.
Geez.
I can name at least 8 off the top of my head right now. And by the way, for anybody who's wondering, Mike Tannenbaum left the team in 2018. And be clear, Chris Greer has been the GM since 2016. Tannenbaum was in charge. Chris Greer had nothing to do with it. He had the title GM was a given title. It was Tannenbaum running that show. So Chris Greer officially became the GM, the actual in charge person, in 2019. Since then, I can give you some names. He hit on Andrew Van Ginkel. He hit on Christian Wilkins. He hit on, in 2020, he hit on Robert Hunt. You could make the argument he hit on Raekwon Davis. It's up to you to decide how you feel about him. You had Javon Holland, Jalen Phillips, Jalen Waddle. You have Devon Achane. You have, right now, it looks like Jalen Wright's going to be a hit. It's just that he's not getting much of an opportunity. The jury is obviously still out on Chop Robinson and Patrick Paul, but there's a bunch of players that Chris Greer has picked that they have turned out to be pretty darn good. In fact, we're all pissed off that he didn't re-sign one of his very first hits, Andrew Van Ginkel. And oh, by the way, his very first hit, Christian Wilkins, he didn't re-sign him. So if you want to talk about Chris Greer hasn't hit on guys, he's hit on them. He just hasn't retained them. So that's something you can poke at him for.
But that comes down to the churning of head coaches. I mean, most of these guys that have left, when they're leaving, are leaving as part of the new regimen, right? So if you're looking at Wilkins, like that was a Flores pick. Flores is a defensive guy. If Flores was still here, maybe you would still have have Wilkins. Like, new head coaches are always going to want to keep their guys. Similar idea with Van Ginkel. As much as we'd all like to have him, right? McDaniel didn't have that attachment with him. And certainly the way that the Dolphins operate can be questioned. I think it was Chris Perkins might have been one of the beat reporters was posting about how a organization should be structured in a way that the GM is the one who drives everything. That says these are the players that you're working with, make it work, and hires a head coach that can function under that. And that's kind of the opposite of the way that Greer functions, in the sense that Greer will always, I think, default when it comes to the personnel choices to his coaches and let them kind of not necessarily make the decisions, right? But I think that he weighs that in a lot more than other GMs who have more power may do. And when you do that and you're now on your third head coach, then you're going to have that roster churn that we've had.
So we're talking now about the roster and everything. So here's where this really needs to talk about. Let's talk about some changes that obviously needs to be made with Mike McDaniel. If he's going to continue to be a head coach, and Robert Gonzalez says that that Greer hasn't hit on a QB. I almost want to shoot myself, because it's, first of all, since 2016, which is when Greer became the GM, do you know how many quarterbacks the Dolphins have actually drafted? They've drafted, as far as I can tell, let's see, I'm looking through the list of all-time Dolphins picks. Brandon Doughty was in 2016 a 7th rounder. That turned out to be nothing, because of course it was. It was nothing. He picked Tua, and then he picked Skyler. Skyler was also a 7th rounder. What quarterbacks was he supposed to hit on? It's been Tua. And by the way, we just gave Tua a bunch of money because of Mike McDaniel and the fact that he's been leading a top 5 offense. I understand. I get it. Right now, in moments like these, all you can see is red. There, you don't see aqua and orange. You just see red. You just want you want the world to burn. I understand. I get it. But the fact of the matter is that we have to look at things from an objective standpoint. We have to try to look at things from a perspective of what can this team do moving forward. If you're going to fire McDaniel and you're going to fire Greer and you're going to leave Steve Ross standing alone in a room like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, then you have to understand what you're asking. You want to basically sign off on the next 5 years and say, I don't care what happens. I have to start over. And when you do that, are you willing to invest in those 5 years? Are you willing to wait and see what happens after 5 years of development? Because, again, we brought in McDaniel after the rebuild happened because we had burned the whole roster from the bottom down and started over. Brought in McDaniel after Flores turned out to be a jerk who doesn't know how to handle being in social interactions, and he still doesn't. You brought in McDaniel. You went to the playoffs twice, had a top 5 offense, and the very first year that things go wrong, you already want him fired. The rebuild has been an abject failure. How? Half the rebuild wasn't even with McDaniel. Half the rebuild was with Flores, who is no longer here because he's a jerk who doesn't know how to handle talking to people. There's two sides to every coin. If you want to say that Flores and McDaniel are polar opposites of each other, well, guess what? Neither is preferable. But I think it's a lot easier for a guy who is personable to learn how to be tough than it is for a tough guy to learn how to be personable. Once you act like a jerk and you are basically programmed to act like a jerk, that is going to be your default. That is going to be your default. You don't suddenly become a nice guy most of the time. So that was the big issue with Brian Flores. He didn't get along with his quarterback. He didn't want Tua. He hated Tua. If we had listened to Brian Flores, we would have had Deshaun Watson. Now, where would we have been then? Oh my God, I don't even want to think about it. Like, you want to talk about no hope. You think Cleveland has hope right now? They don't have hope. Yeah, they've scored more points than us this year. So what? They don't have hope. Deshaun Watson's terrible. And Eric pointing out that the problem is the one bad year. This was our all-in year. Very little flexibility going forward. No, not true. Listen,
Yeah, I would agree with that.
there's room to move around. There's room to cut people. There's room to, if you really need to, you can sacrifice one bad year to purge the salary cap. You can move on from Bradley Chubb. You can move on from Teron Armstead. I'm sure that if you really needed to, you could find a way to maneuver around. And if you really decide Tyreek Hill anymore, you can do that too. You can move on from Tyreek. You can find a way. And
yeah,
so
I mean, that's kind of what people say coming into this year too, that there wasn't that flexibility, that there was limited cap space, and the Dolphins were still able to make moves. I think that's one thing that Chris Greer and Brandon Shore have done, is that even though it doesn't appear that there is a lot of cap space maybe in the upcoming years, I think that the contracts are structured in a way that makes it very easy to free up space when they need it.
And that's the grand thing about it, is that most of our star players are still stars. Tyreek is still Tyreek. It's not like he stopped being Tyreek. It's not like he suddenly got slow. The offense is just not functioning with the quarterbacks that we have in there. And personally, again, I know, Coach, you probably are going to argue this with me until the day we die, but the lack of investment in the offensive line, like Liam Eichenberg is not good enough to be a quality starter in the NFL. He's not. He's just not. And the sad reality of life is that a lot of really good teams out there, their offensive lines are solid. They have really good ones. And whether it's because they all work well in tandem or because their weakest link is not really that weak of a link, whatever the case may be, they did not invest in the offensive line. Robert Hunt is not somebody you can replace with Liam Eichenberg. You just can't do it. It's not possible. Robert Hunt's too good for that. And so when he went out, there was a stark difference in how the offense functioned even last season. Robert Hunt was a big deal of that. He made a lot of big plays. He helped Austin Jackson. Paris Stevens pointing out, yeah, Robert Jones too. Robert Jones, I don't know, man. I don't know if I don't think he's necessarily good enough. He's not good enough. I want to be able to invest in offensive line help. We have the weapons. Weapons are not the issue. We can make something happen with weapons. We still have Tyreek. We still have Jalen Waddle. If Miami decides to keep Jonnu Smith is already proven that if he's given the opportunity, he can be a difference in the seam. He can make plays. He just he's not given the opportunity. You have 3 fantastic running backs, maybe 2 next year, depending on if they decide to move on from Raheem Mostert. But even then, most teams don't have that luxury. 2 really talented running backs in Jalen Wright and Devon Achane that both can bring something different to this team. Just put good offensive linemen in front of them. Armstead is continuing to be Armstead. By the way, I don't think we saw Armstead get hurt today. So give the man a round of applause for not getting hurt. But when he's out there, he is Pro Bowl caliber player. Did we hear Teron Armstead's name get called once today? No, because he's Teron Armstead. He doesn't make mistakes. He's that good. And again, it comes down to being healthy. But maybe, Coach, maybe you saw something he could have done better. But
I have no issue with Teron Armstead.
He's an all-pro.
I think my argument to to what you just said would be that I don't think there's any way that you can look at this game and say the offensive line is anywhere near the reason that we didn't win this game today. And, obviously can't say that they were an issue last week. So, I don't agree. And me and you'll go back and forth on this every single week. I think that the offensive line is okay. You talked about Robert Hunt last year, but, you also have to remember that when Robert Hunt went out, Isaiah Wynn was also already out at that point. So it's not like you were just losing player. Robert Hunt was definitely at least the second starter off of that offensive line, possibly more depending on when some of Teron Armstead's injuries were. So
Connor
it
Williams
wasn't
too.
Yeah.
When he's out, like the big difference.
Yep. So it wasn't just the loss of Hunt that, made the big difference. It was all of those pieces. Again, this week, we've talked about it that, the running game was working, especially the inside running game was working. The pass blocking, I tweeted some stuff out about the pass blocking that, there were pockets where Huntley had plenty of time today. So I don't, I don't agree that, there's been a massive failure in terms of investing in the offensive line. I think that, they were never looking for this offensive line to be a top 3 offensive line. And I'm not, going to sit here and say that they are, but this is absolutely a line that they should be able to win with.
Well, that's what but we're talking about the pass blocking though. And that's the one thing that's the one weakness that they have. They can't, you said, you admit it, you said it. There were times where Tyler Huntley and even Tim Boyle to some extent had plenty of time to throw. Yeah. I get it. I understand it. But the problem is that now they're protecting, like in those few plays where it looks like they're pretty good. Now they're protecting a quarterback who's awful. They're protecting awful quarterbacks, and the balance is still off. Like, okay, great, you had a great pass blocking rep. Oh wait, it's Tyler Huntley back there, not Tua. So that makes a big difference.
Yeah, but if you're saying that it's not just the offensive line, then like the offensive line has plenty of good reps. And I saw somebody mention the Bills game, but again, right, the Bills game was just a shit show from the start that the Dolphins fell behind in. And it was pure pass set situations and no offensive line. Like we can go across the league and we can talk about, who's got who's got a great offensive line. When they fall behind by 3 touchdowns against a team with good pass rushers, there is not an offensive line in the NFL that is going to look great in those situations. But, as they have gelled, right, as they have developed some ways to mitigate that, when the defense can't just pin their ears back, the offensive line didn't just suddenly, have some magic dust sprinkled on them and they're now suddenly good pass protectors these last couple of weeks, or at least, they're not any better at pass protecting these last couple of weeks than they were before. It's just that the game scenarios have allowed them to, be in more favorable situations. And, maybe me and you need to sit down sometime and watch a game together of another offensive line and go through those. But, that's something that I focus on in other games. And I feel like I see just as many issues with other offensive lines as I do with the Dolphins, especially when a team is behind. And that's where, the issues pop up. And, Liam Eichenberg has the reputation that he has. So as soon as, him specifically or, Austin Jackson, as soon as those two mess up, then it's, the world's falling apart for the entire offensive line. But, that's just not the reality, in my opinion.
Offensive face mask is pretty bad, though, Coach. Like that's fundamentally bad. Like that's not a moment that it's like, oh, it just happens. That's a big time. What are you doing? Moment. Can we admit that much?
To an extent.
So that's all I'm gonna say about that. I just once again, I feel like at the end of the day, whether it's for one reason or another, I just feel like there needs to be more talent. That's the only thing the Dolphins haven't invested real talent in. Because we can also say this much. They've invested talent in wide receiver. They have invested talent in running back. They have invested talent to some extent in tight end because they went out and got Jonnu Smith. They have invested talent on defense. They invested in linebacker. They brought in Jordan Brooks, and he's been playing pretty well. They invested in corner. They invested in safety. They invested in pretty much every single position except the offensive line. They had to go. They went and got Aaron Brewer because they lost Connor Williams. That was a necessity.
So they spent $7 million a year on a center. They went out and spent a second-round pick on a tackle
who is going to be the heir apparent to somebody who's already there. That's the problem. That was the biggest issue with me and Patrick Paul, if you remember, it wasn't about Patrick Paul being bad. I'm sure that if he's given enough coaching, he could be a phenomenal left tackle. But that's the problem, is that you are picking somebody who is there to be the heir apparent, not to contribute today. Like, if you want to win now, you need to pick players who will help you win now, not later. That was my biggest issue with Patrick Paul.
Yeah, and we had that discussion, during the draft shows, and me and you shared the same opinion of, the idea of Chop and Patrick Paul, that those were both future picks, but to say that they're not investing in the offensive line just is not true, because maybe they're not investing at the level that you would like, but it's not like, they didn't go out and spend $10 million a year on a running back or draft one in the first round, right? You're saying they're investing in running backs because they traded up to get Jalen Wright in the 4th round, but yet they're investing a 2nd round pick in the offensive line. So they are putting resources there. You just may not be getting those returns as immediately as you would like. The idea there obviously is that hopefully Patrick Paul takes over next year, and we're looking at him as somebody that was a steal in the 2nd round a couple of years down the road, as opposed to having to use a 1st round pick on a left tackle. But they are still investing in it.
But they're not investing in it with the idea of short-term return is the problem. They're investing in long-term. They're playing the long game with the offensive line. That's if you're, again, I believe, this is my belief, and this is why I get so mad about, and I talk about they didn't invest in offensive line. If you view this season as putting all your chips on the table, like this is it, this is our big run, and if we don't get it this time, then we'd fail. The most important position on offense besides the quarterback itself, you could argue, is the offensive line, because Tua, for all the talk about, oh, he's injury prone, he can't do this, he can't do that, Tua was winning games with Flores as his coach, with wide receivers like Preston Williams, Lynn Bowden Jr., Malcolm Perry, Isaiah Ford, and they were moving the football. They were moving it with Tua. And why is that? God help me, I don't even know. But the one thing that Miami does not have is an upper echelon pass blocking offensive line. They can run block just great. I understand it. And when we're talking about investment, yes, if we are talking about a season where the goal is to win today and nothing else matters.
But that's not it. If that was the goal, if nothing else mattered but winning today, Chop Robinson wouldn't have been the 1st round pick. Like
I agree.
I know that that's what some fans want to view this season as, but I don't think that's what the front office views us as pushing all the chips in. So, we may not like the picks because you may view this as, pushing all the chips in. This is the year it has to happen. But the front office doesn't view it that way. And they have built the team in that vision, that the way they drafted makes it clear that they didn't view this season as a push all the chips in, we're going to have to, cut a bunch of people next year. It was clearly viewed as another step in a long-term build.
Well, if we're looking at it as a long-term build, then the question becomes, how much patience do we have to watch it come to fruition? Right now, it looks like there is none. We are ready to burn down the building. That's where we're at right now.
And like I said, that's where the frustration's been with this iteration of McDaniel and Greer as a pair, is the growth that hasn't happened specifically with McDaniel and the play calling.
So at the end of this all, Miami stands at 2-4. Is the season over? No, not yet. Dolphins can still go on a winning streak here. They will have Tua back. Ideally, he doesn't get hurt again. Ideally, the offense goes back to some semblance of normal. And if that is the case, then Miami gets to be able to score points again. It all depends. Like, you hate to say it this way, but it really does. It all depends on Tua. It really does. This offense doesn't function without Tua. You can function without Tyreek. You can function without Waddle. You can function without both of them to some extent. You cannot function without Tua. That's the end. That's the end result.
Agree with that completely.
All right. We're going to go ahead and call it here. Everybody, thank you all so much for listening and for your comments and for giving us stuff to talk about. Listen, I get it. Once again, I understand. Everybody's upset. I'm upset too. I'm going to have to, now when I get off of here, I have to go do laundry. So it's not like I'm looking forward to the rest of the day. I have to go back to work early in the morning, and I have to grumble and groan and listen to everybody in the office telling me about how Dolphins suck, blah, blah, blah. I've got a 49ers fan in the building, for God's sake. So I have to listen to a whole bunch of stuff too, just like you guys do. Season's not over yet. It's not. No. Let's just see what happens once Tua comes back against Arizona. Once again, big thank you to everybody and the sponsors for this show, prizepicks.com. Use that promo code 5, that's FIVE. And when you put in a $5 bet after signing up, you will receive $50 in promotional funds for you to go ahead and continue playing. And of course, the Real Estate Shoppe, you can go ahead and check them out. You can check them out on Instagram. Their page was shown and featured in the beginning of the show. Make sure you check them out. We will see you all next week, and hopefully with a win, because Tua is back.